Superhero movies are an all-time classic, if not loved by everyone. This had proven to be true in terms of both animation and live-action movies. One of the tropes, both tried and true, is when a group of people from the government recruit a bunch of special teens in the name of training them on how to use their powers for the sake of the greater good. Sometimes this works out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the government people get outed for doing this kind of thing for their own personal reasons, and that's exactly what happened in this movie. While it was great though, the controversy behind this movie would be for other reasons. Some call it a tragedy, some call it circumstances, but I call it petty. I call it Disney's way of being petty as normal. Cue the facepalm because I wanted to do the same after I did my due diligence with this movie. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about WTF happened to the Gen11 movie in 1998. Never heard of it yet? Yeah, there's a reason for that. I'll explain. Gen11 is a movie based on the initial miniseries of comics published by WildStorm Productions. Unlike your usual typical Saturday morning cartoon movies, the movie contains not-so-kid-appropriate content, like mature theme, violence, and adult language. It did get screened at the Wizard World Convention in Chicago back in 1998, but it never got released officially in the US due to business conflicts. What were those business conflicts? Well, the creator of the company, Gen²3, sold the company to DC Comics, which became a problem for Disney because they were the ones who originally were to distribute the movie. Because they were direct competitors, Disney shelved the movie, but it did see a limited video release in both Europe and Australia. Since then, it's circulated as a cult classic through bootleg copies and online video platforms. The movie starts off with the introduction of the main character, a college student named Caitlin Fairchild. She gets recruited into a supposedly prestigious but secret military institute for gifted children. In reality, the school is a front for a black ops operation from a government agency called I.O., short for International Operations, whose job is to identify and control individuals with a special gen-active gene that's usually inherited from their parents who are part of an earlier program called Team 7. Caitlin is trained by this agency and awakens her latent powers due to the intensity of it, which are the gifts of superhuman strength and an Amazonian physique. She also befriends other teens that were recruited into this facility, like Roxy Spalding, nicknamed Freefall, who can manipulate gravity, and Grunge, who can mimic anything down to the molecule. This is an aspect of abilities like shape-shifting, camouflage, and power absorption. Soon enough, though, they realize that they weren't here for a good purpose, but for sinister one. I won't go too far into details, but let's just say that it involved things like experimentation and building an army of such teenagers. In order to thwart that, they escape the self-destructing base, fighting off the head of the program, Ivana Bao, and Threshold, another super powerful Gen active, who turns out to be Caitlin's half-brother. A former associate of Caitlin's parents, John Lynch, helps the group to flee the base. He reveals that he was part of the initial Gen actives with his parents and regrets his action, then offers to mentor the teenagers. The film ends with them accepting and preparing to use their powers for good. I mentioned earlier that there were business conflicts, but in reality, it was just a petty move from Disney. Again, honestly, who's surprised by this at this point? So, the Gen11 movie was originally an independent production by WildStorm, but the distribution rights for the US were already financed and secured by Buena Vista Pictures, a well-known Disney subsidiary. In September 1998, around the same time as the screening of Gen11 in Wizard World Chicago, Gen²3, WildStorm's creator, signed and publicized an agreement to sell the company and the intellectual property tied to said company to DC Comics, which was a subsidiary of Time Warner. Once WildStorm came into the hands of DC Comics, the film turned from a potential asset to a direct competitor's advertisement. At least, this was what Disney thought. So the planned summer 1999 release for the movie immediately got halted all over the US. So, essentially, the movie wasn't vaulted for its creative or quality reasons, but purely out of business spite. Like I said, because the company wanted to be petty. So, with this move, the film vanished, poof, from the US market, seeing only limited official video releases in Europe and Australia, because it was handled by Paramount Pictures, a company outside of the business feud of Disney versus Time Warner. Because of this, the movie achieved cult status, with the bootleg copies going around years later. This, not surprisingly, was part of a larger trend of events in the 90s, where corporate mergers and rivalries frequently derailed superhero adaptations, stifling what could have been a diverse animation landscape. While less dramatic, a similar thing happened with another one of Gen²3's creations, The Wildcat. While it did air for a single season on ABC in 1994, there was a lack of promotion and multiple corporate synergy issues between the network and the comic's image production that likely contributed to its swift cancellation. This was, simply put, a case of messy distribution rights within the comic. You could tell by the summary itself, I know you could, don't lie to me, that this was heavily based on the X-Men formula, with a government-created team of superpowered teens rebelling against their creators. But it adds on to it a distinctly 90s edge, characterized by darker themes, graphic violence, and adult language. While both stories feature a diverse group of powered outcasts hunted by the government agency that created them, guided by a paternal mentor figure, it also separates itself from the typical animated superhero fare of the time by embracing instead of averting mature content. Dialogues include profanity, the action is graphic, like broken limbs and gun violence, and the overall tone is far darker than typical children's cartoon, aiming for a direct-to-video mature audience. The narrative also keeps a tight focus on the core trio being Caitlin, Roxy, and Grunge, to maintain quick pacing and impactful action sequences instead of juggling a large cast. The true narrative hook in this movie, however, is the facility's brutal methodology for forcing a Gen active awakening. I forgot to mention this, but it was a hard watch, so to speak. The facility is designed not to educate the student, but to activate their Gen active genes through intense stress and psychological torture. Matthew Callahan, aka Threshold, who, as mentioned, was Caitlin's half-brother, plays the role of main antagonist and tortures the teens to trigger their power. Watching this for the second time, knowing what I knew, made the personal betrayal hurt a lot more than it did. Regardless of that, they did manage to manifest the powers, albeit violent. During their struggle to survive, Caitlin gets super strength and durability, coupled with a super cool Amazonian physique. Percival Chang, aka Grunge, gets the ability to mimic the molecular structure and physical properties of anything he touches, and Roxy manifests the ability to manipulate gravity, allowing her to float or fly. Of course, there are other usages for the above abilities instead of the obvious, but unlike some people, I'm looking at you, Ivana, I'm not going to exploit children for what's in their genes. So, moving on. If you asked me for my personal opinion on Lynch, I'd say he was the kind of character that didn't realize something was wrong until it did go horribly wrong, promised to make sure it didn't happen, and did good on his promise. He's the kind of character that got a second chance and pulled it off. Justin, from a passive bystander to an active helper, Lynch was one of my favorite characters. Here's why. We first see Lynch as a disillusioned former government agent fully aware of the Gen active conspiracy, but unsure how to act. He was originally part of the IO during the formation of the first SPB, short for Special Powers Branch, and he was there when it shut down. He wasn't able to prevent the murders of the original Team 7 members, including Caitlin's parents, at the hands of agents like Burnout, one of the few remaining agents who was still with the cause, and ironically enough, Threshold's dad. He got the chance to make up for that loss when Caitlin and her friends were in need of aid, so he took it. When Ivana's base self-destructs and the teens are cornered, Lynn arrives with his own private squadron. He orchestrates a full-scale assault, complete with helicopter crashes, heavy gunfire, allowing the teens the distraction needed for them to flee. While they fought Threshold, Lynch confronted Ivana, which provided the closure needed to the Old Guard conflict. Using his insider knowledge, he also manages to help the teens escape alive, physically protecting them while they make their way through the chaos. The final sequence is a desperate, messy escape in a stolen vehicle as the base explodes behind them. While they're now free, they're also fugitives, powerful government agency. The film ends with Lynch extending an offer of men, suggesting they work together to fight against whatever is left of the IO, and the teenagers agreeing. While it was perfect sequel bait, Disney decided to wreck it. Again, like once wasn't enough. According to director Kevin Altieri, Disney claimed they were satisfied with the movie, but nothing ever material, leaving fans with nothing but the bootleg VCDs from Asia. While the 1998 movie vanished thin air because of the corporate rivalries, the Gen 13 comics continued releasing for over a decade, completely ignoring the events of the movie. Soon enough, the film turned into non-canonical instant fodder for bootleg, while the comics in turn pursued multiple reboots and dramatic, often shocking storylines that kept the concept alive in print. With Volume 2, the primary run continued for 77 issues. This era was famous for its edgy, self-aware storytelling, completely ignoring the film's specific plot and characterizations. The run ended dramatically with a nuclear detonation that supposedly killed off most of the main team except for Caitlin, with the arc spinning off the fan-favorite DV8 series and facilitating high-profile crossovers like Superman Gen 13 and Batman Gen 13. This, hence, reinforced the franchise's place in the broader comic ecosystem separate from its animated counterpart. Volumes 3 and 4, however, were different. Volume 3 was short-lived, attempting to introduce a new, younger team led by a mentoring Caitlin, usually taking place in alternate dimensions or safe zones, but it quickly folded because they couldn't find an audience. As for Volume 4, It was penned by acclaimed writer Gail Simone, who brought back the original team to lie in the aftermath of a world-altering event called the Armageddon Cross, modernizing the characters and their missions, firmly establishing them with the WildStorm universe hierarchy. Throughout this entire run-through, though, one thing was made clear. The Gen 13 comic maintained complex shifting continuity that prioritized new directions over referencing a failed film. While this movie was absent from US shelves, the film received limited official releases in certain international markets, notably Asia, where it was available in VCD format. These foreign copies later became the primary copies for their eventual digital afterlife. In the early 2000s, with the advent and popularization of file-sharing technology, BitTorrent and Napster, digital copies taken from the international VCD began circulating wildly online, allowing American fans to finally see the complete vaulted movie. This also allowed for the film to quickly gain cult status among fans, precisely because it was unreleased. The mature tone of the movie, like the profanity, implied sexual content, and graphic violence far more intense than mainstream cartoon, made it a forbidden fruit older comic. The quality of the production itself also helped sustain the cult appeal. Well-known and beloved actors were hired for the voice casting of this movie, like Alicia Witt as Caitlin and Mark Hamill as Threshold. Hamill was previously hired as the Joker for Batman the Animated Series, and people loved him for it, adding significant gravitas and instant legitimacy in the eyes of animated fans. The animation director, Kevin Altieri, who was a veteran director from the very same series, gave the film a rather dark, stylized, and instantly recognizable look that resonated with the quality standards established by the acclaimed DC animated universe, making the film feel peer to high-quality superhero adaptation, despite the fans being baffled as to why it was buried and ignored. Regardless of the effort put in, the film ended up as an isolated piece of media, a high-quality, non-canonical artifact whose primary legacy is a testament to both corporate short-sightedness and the enduring power of internet fandom to resurrect lost media. What happened after? Nothing. The film was intended to be a launchpad for a significant push into the visual, and the exciting cliffhangers and sequel bait, like the threat of Threshold's return or the establishment full heroic team under Lynch's mentorship, however, remained frozen in that single film, never to receive an official cinematic or animated. While the comics offered plenty of act, their path was chaos. I think I could even go as far as to say that the internal chaos mirrored the external corporate problem. The initial sale to DC eventually led to the entire WildStorm Imp being shut down in 2011, fully absorbing the characters into the mainline DC universe, where they only ever made sporadic appearances. The brand recognition they built in the 90s faded. While the distribution rights remained the central absurdity, Disney still technically retained the US distribution right and continually refuses to release it officially because it remains a promotion for a direct major competitor as a DC Comics property. Hence, looking at everything, the film exists in a permanent corporate limbo. It can't be officially released in the US by DC or Warner, and it won't be released by Disney. The Gen 13 animated movie, to this day, which was once destined to be a success, now dubbed to be a lasting artifact of how intercorporate rivalries can kill a creative project and hence starve a franchise of its potential. Marvelous verdict. So, how can I say this? Nothing happened to the Gen 13 movie. The story was great, the fans were loyal and amazing, the animation was amazing, and the casting was perfection. What was the actual reason behind the downfall? Conflict. And that's saying it nice. One small change, one little conflict, one petty decision. A 27-year-old grudge. That's what one of the leading animation studios has been reduced. A company holding a grudge over the ownership of comics. Like, I'd understand if there were contractual obligations or something, but this is just being petty over who has the original. This is just breaking your own toy because someone else in your class has a similar or a better one. This is also just hurting other innocent, blameless people around you because your rival got a single point more than you did in the exam. But I don't know. That's just, what do you guys? Am I overreact? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.